All right, good evening. We are having the Finance Committee meeting for the City of Sunbury. It's March 15th, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. The chair is absent this evening. Also is Mr. Gremley absent. Roll call.
Mayor St. John.
Here.
Mr. Capel.
Here.
Mr. Neff.
Here.
Mrs. Cooper. Here. And Mr. Martin.
Here.
All present.
Right, the Finance Committee met on February 15th and there are minutes to review.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Councilwoman Cooper. Second by Councilman Capel. Discussion. Roll call.
Mr. Martin.
Yes.
Mr. Neff.
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper. Yes. Mr. Capel.
Yes.
Mayor St. John.
Yes.
5 ayes.
Right. On the new business, something I believe we have spoken about, the policy update on the debt and cash reserve.
In your packet tonight, I have proposed policies for a debt policy and a cash reserve policy. These are two separate policies. The purpose of these is to just provide a guideline of how we could go about handling our finances on a month-to-month basis, and also when we're looking at borrowing money and going into debt. So I can highlight a few items in these. The debt policy is what you have first, starting at page 3, and it goes through an addendum on page 7. And then that's followed by the cash policy. The debt policy is not intended to restrict the debt program of the city. It's intended to guide and provide council and administration a framework for making debt decisions. It talks about when we would spend available cash for certain assets versus going out and acquiring some debt to purchase those assets. It also talks about certain debt limits that we should maintain. We have a direct debt limit versus an indirect debt limit. Those are both described in detail in the addendum. And those numbers are based primarily on the city's assessed value. And that number is provided by the county auditor. There's a lot of information in here, and I don't want to bore you by going through all of it, but those are just some of the highlighted items that I wanted to point out. I'm happy to answer any questions or give you guys some time to review it. I would ask that we approve this whenever we put it up to council, probably at next council meeting or shortly thereafter. These policies will go a long way in helping our managerial aspect of our bond rating as well. If we have these in place, there's a management portion that the bond companies look for when they're doing a rating. And if we have strong policies in place, such as for debt and cash reserve, then they tend to view that very favorably.
Do these have to be passed via ordinance or just with a motion and a vote? Do you know?
I would pass them as a resolution.
A resolution?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. On the cash policy, the primary purpose of this one is to define the minimum fund balances for each fund that we have, so that we can make sure we're maintaining adequate reserves in case there was some kind of catastrophe or anything that caused our financial situation to go very badly. It talks about what a financial action plan on page 9 on what the city would do and what management would do if we were unable to meet the required reserve. And typically, well, the way I have it spelled out here is 105-day reserve in the general fund, 105 days being basically what we would need to spend in operating expenses for 105 days of general normal operations. And that's approximately 28% of the general fund operating expenditures. The financial action plan goes through 3 different steps that we would do in sequential order if we could not meet those cash reserves. Step 1, depending on how the cash reserve fell below that amount, we would follow certain steps there. Step 2 is a little bit more drastic if the reserves were to drop below 20%. And then step 3 is if they were to drop below 15%, there would be much more stringent actions taken to address that. And then it's described certain funds that outside of the general fund that would also be subject to this cash reserve policy. And these funds are mainly those that require debt service. Oh, and it also calls for a monitoring of a month-to-month basis. So since we meet as a finance committee already on a monthly basis, that would be an easy thing to add into the steps of our processes for finance, just to be on, for example, on the year-to-date fund sheet, which I provide monthly, I could have a column out to the right, which shows the percentage that we're sitting at right now, so that we can easily compare that with the 28% base that we have set. So these are really good policies to have in place. I received both of these drafts from Brian Cooper at Baker Tilly, and he and I have been working closely and fine-tuning these to meet the needs of Sunbury. So I feel confident that it's in a good place right now, but I'm happy to do any tweaks or edits, whatever you would like me to do.
Can we talk a little bit about the addendum and the direct debt limit?
Yes.
These are actual values that are in here in the
Correct. Yes. The very top number, the 230 million, that is the city of Sunbury's assessed value as of January 1st, 2022. And this is directly from the county auditor. So they take all of the property values within the county. They assess them, as you know, on I believe it's every 3 years. And that is the total cumulative value of all the property within the city of Sunbury. And then we have some percentage calculations there, a maximum allowable of voted debt of 10.5% and an unvoted maximum allowable of 5.5%. These are all just various limits that we would apply to our formula calculation on whether or not we can afford to go into any more debt.
I want to make sure I'm really clear. When under direct debt limits, the statutory general obligation, are you saying this is a state law or this is the proposed policy percentages? Where it says
I don't think
5% assessed value and 5.5 for unvoted debt.
I don't believe that is that isn't like an Ohio statutory guidance. I believe that's just this policy, but I'll have to confirm.
I guess my question with that is, don't we have more than $12 million worth of debt today?
$12 million worth of debt.
Yeah, unvoted debt, $12 million.
No.
Unvoted maximum allowable. What do we have in this?
No. So a lot of the debt that we have for the sewer fund, which I imagine that's what you're referring to,
Yes.
mainly, that is not general obligation debt.
Okay.
So that's not subject to this direct debt limit.
So it'd be something like the municipal building renovation debt would go into that 5.5%.
Yes.
Got it.
Yes. And also, well, more specifically, OWDA and OPWC loans do not apply to this. They're outside of the realm of this direct debt limit calculation.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. In other words, like we're issuing bonds or something. Okay, not a loan through some state sponsored program.
That's correct. Generally correct. Yes.
That makes sense.
Yeah. In talking with Brian Cooper, a lot of the debt that we actually have right now is not even subject to this direct debt limit.
Got it.
So it seems like the majority of debt that we would get into wouldn't be subject to this. So,
But if we were to do without voter approval, I mean, in other words, we said we're going to issue bonds for a park improvement or something that would go towards this.
correct. Without voter approval, correct. Yes. And as you know, there are other ways you could go about obtaining debt for those types of means, such as levies and things. And in those situations, they would be voted and not subject to this. And plus they would have revenue backed, meaning like a tax levy would back and support the repayment of that debt. So they would not be subject to this either.
Just to follow up on that, and sorry, I'm hogging questions here. The 10.5% for assessed value of voted debt or maximum allowable voted, a levy or bond, would that go towards the 10.5%?
For the 10.5, for the voted maximum allowable,
Yes.
if it is only, it would unless it is specifically backed by certain revenues.
Okay.
Well, so which most levies would be backed by specific revenues, so probably wouldn't apply in most cases.
Okay, I think
Right, but the park bond probably doesn't have a revenue source attached to it, so it's likely to be captured under this, whatever our maximum amount is.
Yeah, it could be if there's no dedicated revenue source for it, correct? Mhm.
It does sound like there's an exclusion if you pledge based on the policy, if you pledge general income for each, if you pledge income tax, it also is not subject to the cap.
Got it.
So
That's correct.
yeah, I think we probably just want to go through a bunch of the scenarios, just make sure we're understanding what's what.
Right, that's a great point. If you do in the ordinance, whenever this debt is established, if the ordinance specifies this debt will be repaid by income tax revenues, those issuances do not apply to the debt limit.
It's kind of like an unsecured loan is like really the way we're looking at it. Like, we don't have a revenue source, but it's important to.
Right.
Council, authorized it. That would go into the 5.5%, correct?
Correct.
And then if we actually went and said, I don't see this happening, but if we went to the voters and just said, hey, we want your authorization to go into this 10.5%. We're not asking you for revenue. We're just asking for your approval for us to allocate those funds that would chip away at the 10.5%.
Correct.
Okay, I understand.
Good questions.
Good answers. I was had a little angst there for a second.
Oh.
Okay. Can you maybe just hit on some of the highlights on the cash policy? One thing in my mind, we talked, I think it was in back-to-back finance meetings about this type of policy coming out, also with the investment policy that is on the agenda tonight. I just want to make sure I'm clearly segregating those two. Can you maybe highlight what the cash policy is intended to do and or what it's allowed, like the benefit of us putting this policy in? It allows us to do what?
Yeah. So really the purpose paragraph there at the very front is very it's very descriptive. It basically tells us what the cash policy is intended to do. It's going to assist us in making financial decisions based on whether or not we should spend certain cash or not spend certain cash. So it's going to secure our major operating funds and making sure that they have adequate financial reserves. So if there were some kind of catastrophic event or an emergency and the loss of revenue or a major revenue source went offline, the minimum fund balance would allow council and administration to kind of react and make certain strategic decisions on how to move forward. So every year at budget preparations, the annual appropriations will be adjusted to make sure that the minimum fund balance is met in the general fund. And that minimum is 105 days or approximately 28% of general fund expenses. It'll be monitored on a month-to-month basis at monthly finance committee meetings. In compliance, if it's determined that we cannot meet these minimum requirements, there will be a statement by the mayor to explain what the situation is, how it occurred, how we are reacting to that situation. And the financial action plan would then be implemented, which I mentioned previously, step 1, step 2, step 3, all based on where our reserves drop. If they drop below 28%, then if that is caused by a one-time capital purchase, then there's really no action that's required to be taken. But if it's due to something other than a one-time capital purchase, then city officials shall, during the budget process, reduce all appropriate appropriations, all possible appropriations. If it drops below 20%, we're under step 2, then we have to take additional measures to limit the expenditures and somehow increase our revenues. And there are a series of other steps under there. And then step 3, below 15%. This is where we would discuss revenue enhancements, tax levies, reductions in personnel, furloughs, things of that nature. And that's
Just,
basically-
so based on my current state, and I think why this is important to call out now. We carry large cash balances now, high percentages, right?
Yes.
In other words, like how it does tie to the investment policy is it gives you, the finance director, more authority. I mean, you're not going to try to bump up against the 28%, but you need more flexibility so we can make our money work for us through the investment policy, right? And these thresholds in cash are basically saying, if we're teetering up against these balances, there are steps to take place that we will put in to keep our residents safe and the city secure.
Precisely.
Okay.
I think it's safe to say, yeah, that they are related, as you were saying. I mean, it provides a guideline for how much cash can be contained in the bank account. So it gives you, the latitude to take some action to invest the funds as opposed to them sitting there now because we don't have a policy, right?
Correct. Underneath that financial action plan, it talks about funds outside the general fund. Just want to note very briefly here, this requires a minimum of 50% of the expected annual debt service for each fund, which is just saying basically if we know that we have a sewer fund debt that we have to make debt payments of $500,000 next year, we need to make sure we have at least $250,000 in cash in that sewer fund. It's just a good policies to have in place. And as I mentioned before, with the managerial review of whenever we go out to get a bond rating, these will be very nice to have.
Which is a reminder for Cassie, we will be doing this summer. Going
Yeah.
to see the bond rating.
Finance committee, other questions? Comments?
You're looking for approval for this at our next meeting. I'll put it in the resolution. I'm not sure if that'll be at the next council meeting. Probably it will be. Resolution has 3 readings. So it'll
Plenty of
probably-
time to look over and ask questions. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, so right now it's just for you to look through and read it at night when you're bored.
Is the projected reserves, like written as percentage anywhere that we can see like currently with what it is right now?
You can look at the year-to-date fund report. It's page 17 of your finance committee packet. I don't have the percentages listed out, but you can kind of see where each fund balance sat at the beginning of the year, which is the first numerical column there on the left. Well, right after the description, to the right of the description, that's what we had at the beginning balance of 2023. And then everything over here at the unencumbered, this would be what we expect to have at the end of 2023, given all of the appropriations that we've already made and set in the budget. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So you can kind of do a little calculation there, but I think we're well over 28% in all of these funds.
All seems good.
Thank you. Good. The only other thing I had, if you're ready to move on, the only other, oh, I'm good.
Everybody ready to move on? All right, move on.
I have February's variance report for revenues and expenses. Page 11 starts the variance report for expenditures. Now, these are all year-to-date expenditures, so not just the month of February, but for January and February. So we're at 16.67% through the year as of February 28th. So anywhere where we see a percentage spent that is higher than the 16.67, if that is more than 10% higher, then I've highlighted it and given a brief description as to why. So benefits for the police, that's the very first one there. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'll just mention a few larger ones. The first half of the HSA funding was done in the first 2 months of the year. So that was a big hit to the expense. And also we paid the BWC full year premium and also the 2022 true up, which was significant. So there's some big hits there. I expect for the rest of the year that this spending will even out. I don't necessarily expect that we would have to increase anything at this time.
The HSA distribution, we did it twice a year.
Yes,
So we did one in January and one in August.
it'll be July 1st.
July.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. Great.
Yep, and then officer uniforms, we've paid the majority of that line. That was an annual payment according to the FOP policy for their uniforms. On page 12, auditors, about halfway down the page, auditors and treasurers fees. We appropriated $12,000 for the year and we've already spent 80% of that. I just want to note that property tax payments were made in February, and that's what that $9,500.60 is referring to. However, we did get a refund from the county auditor, and that was related, that was about $6,000. And that was because of property taxes that were then after the fact determined to be that we didn't owe, that were tax exempt. So they refunded that money. Unfortunately, it's going to sit here as an expense because the revenue has to be booked into a revenue account. We can't just offset.
You can't just subtract it
Now.
from the expense account. Okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering about that. I'm glad you explained that.
Yeah.
The wheel loader stands out a little bit.
Which one?
The wheel loader.
Oh, yeah. Yes, the wheel loader. That's been verified. That has not been paid for twice.
Thank you.
It's not an outline.
Is that service twice a year payment?
Yes.
Yeah. Same thing on the cemetery, twice a year.
Yes. Yeah, all of the debt is paid either in January and July or what is, yeah, you know, every 6 months.
Under revenue.
Okay, so revenue. So income tax revenue is looking good. As you can see, the third line item down there, we're on page 15. The third line down, income tax. Of the 3.9 million, which we've budgeted this year, we've collected 714,000, which is 18.3%, which is slightly higher than where we are in the year. So that's good. I expect that to continue to trend upward, and seeing that it's higher only in February is a good sign, because typically I don't see it go higher until April, May. So it's really good that it's higher than our budget right now.
You primarily attribute that, that's what I kind of watch closely. You primarily attribute that to the higher percentage of withholding that we're getting from employers versus I would say individual taxpayers that are doing their taxes at the end of the year.
Absolutely, yeah, because the withholdings are remitted to Rita or whoever. The company is withholding them and remitting them to Rita on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. So yes, I think that's part of it. Building permits, we are kind of low there, but I don't expect that to get higher until middle of the year. We did have 23 new builds year to date. So I'm looking down at the sewer fund now on page 16. And we've collected more than half of the sewer tap for the reserve operating fund, and then more than 100% of the sewer tap sinking fund for debt service.
Back to the building permit, did we account for the different way that we do building permit? So this is the adjustment?
Yeah, that's the note that I put. I think the budget picked up the old methodology that included the inspection fees that essentially were passed through and
Right.
to inspectors. So
So that 375 might be high.
I think it's high, but on the other side, we shouldn't have that expense. It should wash pretty
Mhm.
closely. But yeah, when I look at that, I thought,
Yeah, that's a good point.
So, I mean, as far as affecting the bottom line, it's we're expecting a near net wash,
Mhm.
even though revenues are coming in lower. We weren't typically the recipient of the revenue anyways. I mean, the city, we were hiring people to do the work outside. Now the county's doing it, right?
Yes.
All right. Okay.
Sewer payments are looking good. We're higher than budget right now for sewer collections. Impact fees for roads and parks and rec and for municipal and police, they're all looking very solid right now. I expect the revenue budget was probably too low for all of those.
Did we account for any revenue? Did we budget?
The municipal and the police we did, but not for the trees and the park, I'm sorry, not for the roads and the parks and rec. Those were new funds that were established this year, so I didn't have any revenue projections.
Steve, remind me, when do we see the increase to the full amount?
the full amount.
Where are we right now in like the?
I think we're at 50. And I don't know if there's another step to 75 or if it goes right to 100 off the top of my head.
I think it's 75 after July 1st and then 100 next January.
Yeah, calendar year.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah. We did get $4,800 from Metro Development for the ravines at Meadow Ridge. And that's $4,800 at the very bottom, the pass-through income. Also just want to note in March, which is not reflected on this spreadsheet, in March, we received probably like $70,000 from Romanelli, between Romanelli and I believe Pulte for inspections and engineering fees for Rolling Hills and Price Ponds, I believe.
So these are primarily going back to CT.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, just a pass through. So we hold on to it in this revenue and then expend it out.
Just gonna ask a layman's question here, layman over here. How difficult is that to reconcile and make sure that, you know, the effort that CT is putting in? I've seen their invoices. I mean, I don't know how you make heads or tails out of it.
Yeah, it's not easy. They do a breakdown on every type of work that they do on a certain project. However, monitoring that in itself could be a task, like knowing exactly what construction administration is versus design service, you know. I'm not an engineer.
Yeah, they usually have a project number on it, and right in there, in the billing, in the project number, it'll say, you know, we can bill up to this amount. And as long as that amount matches what we brought in, they seem to bill up to that amount, so it washes. That's how I look at it. When I see it, I can tell how close they're getting on any specific project, if you get back into the detail.
I think what their invoice misses, and could be wrong on this, but the last time I looked at them was we give you the project number, but then there's got to be another key somewhere that says this project is for ravines at Meadow Ridge preliminary plat review or something. It doesn't say that on the invoice from what I recall. I think it just says like PRJ and a sequence of numbers or something.
It does give a brief description of a project as well, in addition to a project number. However, a certain project, like for example, ravines at Meadow Ridge, that could have various phases.
Right.
And it's not always broken out on the invoice, which phase or which, you know, which step in the process they're on.
Okay.
So,
And are we the ones that is Sunbury the organization that, you know, more or less like says, here's your permit fee or something like that? We send them a bill, or they have to send us the money before we review it. How does that work? How does Ravines know what to pay?
CT generates this is what it's gonna cost. And it's usually a dual email that's going to them and to us.
Sorry.
It's okay.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, some of it is, you know, like in our fee schedule, some of it's driven by the area of a subdivision and things like that. So there are, you know, we can do the math and it gets specific to why this is X, because it's, you know, the number of acres times a fee that's in that fee structure that was passed last year.
Okay. The other questions on the, excuse me, expense or revenue report? Dana, do you feel like you're getting acclimated?
I am.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. I do feel that. The only other item I had to discuss is the bank to book reconciliation. There's not a whole lot on here to call out. We just have a few items that are going to clear next month due to timing, and a couple items that were missed. Other than that, got $33,000 in outstanding checks, and they're all within 60 days. The majority of them are within 30 days. There's only two small ones that are outside of the 30 days. Oh, and my unidentified variance is the same
Yeah. see,
amount. Yeah.
We're gonna write that off soon?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I'm gonna keep it there for a little bit. I have an unidentified variance in the payroll as well, and that's gonna offset that other variance. So it's gonna be even smaller, I think, at this point.
Outstanding checks, do we have a void after 90 days?
It says void after 30 days on our checks.
But it'll still pay?
I'm not sure. I imagine the bank, it depends on what the bank does. It's up to the bank at that point. I did run into a situation where I found a check that accidentally didn't go into the mail, and it was past 30 days at that point, still sitting in my office. And I went ahead and just voided it and rewrote another check because I didn't want to send it to the vendor. So it's easy to void a check and just do a new one. I'm not sure if you're all aware, we also have a positive pay
I was
feature.
just gonna ask you, I was like, I don't want to get a bad answer on record here. If I was gonna say, do we have positive pay?
We're utilizing positive pay for every check. Yes.
You want me to explain that or you to explain?
Oh, you're the banker, go ahead.
Okay.
Or I'm happy to if you want.
I'll give it the layman's version. It's not technical. Positive pay is a service that you can work with your bank to do when you issue a check. Basically, it's not just you write a check and it's a piece of paper. You're actually inputting information into a file like check number, typically payee, the actual dollars and cents. And so what happens is that check file gets loaded before you're even handing over the check. So in other words, the institution you're writing the check on, like First Commonwealth Bank or something, that has controls in place that it won't actually authorize payment of that check if there's fraud. And so if somebody says they change a number or a character on the check and they try to cash a $1,000 check for a $10,000 check, it will block that from happening. Is
Yeah,
that generally?
and there are certain situations where I'll get an email from the bank where I've forgotten to upload a certain, like 1 or 2 checks into the positive pay. And I'll get an email from the bank and they will not issue payment on that check, even if it's a legitimate check. I just haven't uploaded the positive pay file. They will not issue payment on that check unless I go into the bank and specifically approve that payment. So it's a really good control.
What it looks like sometimes for the like the person cashing the check, if it is like a legitimate check, what it'll look like is it'll show up on their bank account. Sometimes they'll get provisional credit or something for the check. And then all the banks in the background are working on like, okay, when does First Commonwealth actually transfer the money to JP Morgan Chase? So there shouldn't be a customer impact unless it's legitimate fraud or something.
Sure.
Getting into some heavy stuff here in finance. Is there anything else? Dina, did you have anything else you wanted?
I didn't have anything else. I would like to ask if any of you have questions on the investment policy. It's up for second reading tonight at council. I didn't have anything to add. Just wondered if anyone had any thoughts they wanted to bring up. No? Okay.
I don't have any questions.
Great.
I wanted to say thanks for putting it together in quick order. I agree with the direction that you're going. I think let's let our money work for us. I think we're in some ultra low yield, what do you call them, investments. We have money in accounts that is not doing what it could be doing for us. That's good.
Just to put all this dollar amounts in perspective, I was at a program last night at the Historical Society. And when this building was built in 1868, the building cost $5,000 to build. And then the masonry group in town donated $1,500 to add to that $5,000 to put the 3rd floor on the building. So the first 2 floors were a school and then the 3rd floor was the masonry group. So this whole building from ground to the top of the roof cost $6,500 to build in 1868.
That's cool.
Now you couldn't replace the windows on this floor for that amount.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we won't talk about what I just paid for my new house. It's not 3-story.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, replacement roof on this 8 years ago was what, 390 grand?
Yeah. But we went with copper
Right.
because it would last longer and yeah.
That's good. Now, I had a question. This is gonna carry over into services a little bit. Have we budgeted or have we received the crack sealer yet? I know we issued payment.
It is going to be delivered on the 30th.
Okay. Do we get any training on that? Do we account for any of that?
We will get training upon delivery. Yes.
Okay. And then supplies. did we budget for that or do we have some? I'm talking about the material
Yeah.
primarily, like sand and tar.
We have some materials on hand. But we'll go through that and we will have to purchase out of the supply budget.
Okay.
Some additional materials.
Okay. Is the plan on that, again, I'm down a little outside finance, but is the plan to kind of jump on that when the weather turns? And do we have like generally a plan on what areas we're gonna
We
hit?
haven't really made that plan up yet.
Okay. I know you have some staffing things we're working through.
Yeah, and we've got the pavement condition report, we've got the robotics thing we can fall back on. I've got my eye on Cherry Street out to the court limits, things like that, so.
That reminds me of a tangentially related question too to finance. So I saw that we posted the positions.
Yes.
And if memory serves, we posted the superintendent position as exempt.
Correct.
Did we adjust the pay and is there any budgetary consideration with that?
We did not adjust the pay. It's got a fairly decent top end to it.
Okay.
And I think as we talk with people, we will look at, if they're also coming in on a snow event, that may be a flat payment or something above and beyond, because that only seems. Yeah.
But on the job posting itself, does it list an hourly rate?
I don't think we put it on the posting.
Okay. So it is like a
Did we put a pay scale at all?
45 to 90 grand or something?
Okay.
What was the question?
No, I asked basically the same thing because you asked about hourly and I wasn't sure if I remembered seeing a pay scale on there at all.
Okay. Yeah. Do we normally do that? Oh, don't we normally put like a rate?
It's been all different ways. And usually if it's an hourly position, we'll usually put the range on it.
I think it helps narrow down your field of candidates greatly when you post it.
I agree. with that.
I know that's a huge topic these days, back and forth. I'm firmly on the side of post the range and don't screw around with it.
Yeah, I'm in that same way. Like I wouldn't apply for a job like
Exactly.
director of technology because I'm like, oh, you know what, I could never get it or something.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. Let staff mull that over, think about it.
Well, I think once we have that pool and we kind of identify people we'd like to interview, we can make that part of that initial discussion of, we'd like to invite you to an interview. Please be aware this is the range that we would be considering.
Do
And
we ask anywhere for salary expectations in the application process? I know half the people won't put anything.
no, generally we ask that during the interview. Or we'll state kind of, this is the range on the pay grid that we have. Are you comfortable with that? Is that something that'll work for you?
It
So
seems
the finance director, city administrator, and assistant city administrator, we did list ranges, right? Yeah, I believe we did. Okay. All right.
So if you fill out the application online, there is a line that does ask, what is the desired?
Desired pay.
that's probably not a required or
Yeah.
field.
Right.
Okay,
But
yeah.
not everybody fills out the online application. They submit a resume and.
Right.
Sounds good. Any other items?
No.
We have a finance position open as well.
Finance clerk, yes,
Great.
yes.
Any
We've,
interest yet?
yes, probably about a dozen or so,
Wow.
Yeah.
a dozen applications. We sure did.
What's the finance?
Yes. Yes.
What is that?
What's the job, basically?
Yeah,
Primarily, the finance clerk will be doing utility billing and accounts payable.
Okay.
Also, helping out with some zoning payments, although Alex is probably going to be handling that majority of that. Some cemetery, not maintenance, but records maintaining. Some help with payroll. Yeah, the majority of it I see is utility billing and accounts payable. Because those would be the bulk of the time.
Yeah.
Utility billing is pretty much a full-time job. It ebbs and flows with the workload that it entails. So, busy during certain times of the month, not so busy during other times of the month. Accounts payable it's a constant flow of invoices coming in, checks being written, accounts being reconciled. It's a big job.
Where do we post the jobs? I mean, I know they're on the Sunbury website, but do they go anyplace else?
It's all on Facebook.
Indeed, Facebook, is it OML,
Yes.
the municipal, and then the website, our website, those are the places.
I always recommend LinkedIn too.
LinkedIn.
I think it's a very good spot.
What's that?
Draw attention.
Yeah, LinkedIn is a really good one.
With an easy apply and a salary range.
Yes.
Sure. We should probably look at getting City of Sunbury LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yes.
Because LinkedIn is professional Facebook anymore.
Right. Did we get the contract signed with Joey Thomas?
I sent it to him, I sent the revision to him on Monday, I think.
Okay,
So he's got it.
okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay, sounds good. Great. Anything else?
No. Nothing.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn, Mr. Capel,
Second.
second by Mr. Neff, discussion, roll call.
Mr. Capel?
Yes.
Mr. Neff?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper? Yes. Mayor St. John?
Yes.